Welcome to r/JustNoHOA, where people tell stories about their crazy homeowner associations. And without any further ado, let's dive right into the stories. Found a pair of headphones. I am in a condo with an HOA, and this morning I found a nice lost pair of headphones in the gym. Too large to fit into the lost and found box slot. Our president is a thief, so I was leery of just passing them off to her and walking away. So I found our last newsletter that was accidentally emailed to everyone instead of BCC'd. The board has been ridiculously anal about not giving us a mailing list. So I just replied to this and asked if anyone lost a pair of headphones to give a description to me by email, and I would return it to the rightful owner. All hell breaks loose. Since then I've gotten a message from the president, the same one who has given me a threat from a lawyer never to speak to her again, demanding I turn in the headphones to the very same lost and found box that they cannot fit in. I have since gotten a message from the manager telling me not to use the mailing list and to just email her so she can send the information to the current residents, as several on the email list are not residents and prefer to not be bothered with emails. What? I'm not making this up, and it's probably going to get weirder. Wow, an HOA president being a thief. Why am I just not surprised by this anymore? By the way guys, speaking about headphones, when you listen to music, what kind of headphones do you use? Personally, on PC, and especially when I'm doing the recording, I'm using some cheap $40 headphones, but to be honest, they do the job. Got a, not really an, HOA disbanded. After years of hearing stories of problems with HOAs and having no tolerance for busybodies ourselves, my wife and I were both solidly in agreement that we would never purchase a home in an HOA. When we finally did find a house and purchased it, we knew for a fact that we were not in an HOA. However, just behind us we learned there was a, not really, HOA. About a week after we moved in, there was a knock on the door. One of the neighbors behind us announcing that she was president of the HOA and welcoming us to the neighborhood. Seems civil enough, but we asked, what HOA?
Oh, we're behind you. The home behind you is where the HOA starts.
Okay, that's nice. Nice to meet you. Just general pleasantries. We were hopeful, we were shocked even, someone associated with the management of an HOA that was not a complete busybody psychopath. How wrong we were. The way our lot was, there was a sliver of green space between our property line and the sidewalk in a somewhat triangular shape. The street ran southwest, our property line ran due east-west. So there was a wedge of land there. We had always been told that this belonged to the HOA. Yada yada yada, no big deal, just meant we did not have to deal with the upkeep of this land. Now that this setup is all in place, it's time to start the story of how we got the, not really an, HOA dissolved. We had a couple of trees in our yard, literally on the property line, so we took responsibility for taking care of these things. They are massive. They are also a pain in the butt, incredibly dense/heavy, and because of the way the limbs grow, they are prone to splitting and dropping limbs. There was a huge limb that extended way out into the street, adjacent to the green space owned by the HOA. This thing was a major risk of dropping and severely injuring/killing someone. We did not want that on our conscience or our insurance. And so we decided to take that limb down entirely, as well as clean out a lot of the dead wood in the two trees. Hired an arborist, they came out, did their thing. $1,400 later, we were left with some decent sized rounds that we were going to move over the next weekend. I was out of town the first weekend after we removed the limb. I should note that the wood was neatly stacked in the green space on the bark dust out of everyone's way and in no way a hazard or eyesore. Enter the shrieking harpy president of the HOA. My wife had stepped out the door the day I had left on my trip, and she pulls up into our driveway, rolls down the window and starts yelling at my wife.
You need to move that wood now. That's private property of the HOA. Move it now.
My wife is not a confrontational type. She's also somewhat petite and tried to explain to the harpy that I was out of town and that we would be moving it as soon as I got back in town the next weekend. Nope, not good enough. She shrieks at my wife some more, and my wife ends up grabbing the wheelbarrow and somehow moves this stack of rounds, some of them weighed close to 100 pounds, around the fence, up our driveway and into the backyard. She was pissed. So was I. We knew where the harpy lived, so when I got back I went over to talk to her and explain that I was rather displeased in how she treated my wife. Did not pound on the door, was not aggressive or anything. They would not answer the door. Cowards, we knew they were home. This left us with a bit of a displeased taste in our mouth. The next spring, the hedge that is planted outside of our fence line, well, it was not maintained very well and pushed over 2 sections of our wooden fence. So I emailed the harpy and explained that their hedge had damaged our fence.
It is not our hedge.
It is growing in your green space.
That is not our green space.
Wait, what? Then why the F did you decide to screech at my wife last summer when we had the wood stacked there? Silence. Well, at that point I fixed the fence so our dog would not escape after pruning the laurel back sufficiently that it would not damage the fence again. And started making some phone calls. I contacted the county and ended up speaking to about 7 different departments in order to figure out who actually owned that strip of land. After probably 2 weeks of trying to find the right people to talk to, I got to the roads division. The green space was marked as part of the right of way for the road, and therefore no one actually owned that space. So I can chop down that ugly overgrown hedge that is encroaching on the sidewalk and knocking down my fence?
Yep,
says the kind gentleman from the roads division.
As an aside,
he asked,
you mentioned something about there being an HOA associated with the plots to the east of your property?
Yeah?
Well, part of what took me so long to get an answer for you is that it turns out there's no HOA registered with the county there, so we were looking in the wrong place entirely.
Wait, there's no HOA there?
No, hasn't ever been one since that subdivision was built.
Huh? Interesting. And a plot was hatched. We had befriended a couple of people within the neighborhood behind us and they were rather fed up with Mrs.
President of the HOA
and her antics. She was the typical busybody, bullying anyone she did not like, and apparently for the last 10 years or so had been collecting HOA dues from everyone in the neighborhood to the tune of $300 per year. There were 36 homes in the HOA, right around $100 in dues, for a non-existent HOA. With no real maintenance. Oh, and they hosted an annual block party, potluck style. They pulled weeds from the green space on a volunteer basis. So I did what any red-blooded American would do. I got 36 envelopes, 36 stamps and printed off 36 copies of a letter with my findings from the county that there was not now, nor ever had been for the recorded history of the subdivision, any HOA, neighborhood association or any similar organization. And that they, collectively, had paid in excess of $100,000 in dues over that time to a non-existent entity plus any fines the non-existent HOA had decided to levy. The neighbors, in turn, did exactly what any red-blooded American would do. They sued the hell out of her for every penny they had paid over the last 10 years. 1, 2. And there's no longer an HOA behind us. This story really makes you wonder how many of the supposed HOAs that exist are real and how many are just fictional cash grabs. By the way, if you have watched until here, please don't forget to post some star emojis in the comments and also like the video if you want to support me. All support is very much appreciated, thank you so much. Just moved into a condo, neighbor is tasing hell over my non-existent pet bird. I just bought a condo that has been vacant for a while. Right after I bought the place, before I even started moving in, I got an official warning from the HOA that my next door neighbor has called the emergency line 3 times over my pet bird that is so loud in the mornings it startled him awake and caused him emotional distress. In their email they specifically said what time my bird was making these loud noises. Now, the thing is, I don't have any pets and for the past few nights I've stayed up to that specific time to see if I could hear anything loud and disturbing as he described. Which I did not, aside from a few birds chirping quietly outside. However, this neighbor is still calling the HOA's emergency line every night to complain about my bird. The HOA manager does not believe I don't have a pet bird, even though I've offered to let him come see. He said that I could just be hiding the bird. Today I got a letter from Animal Welfare and Enforcement about my bird's vocalizations disturbing the peace. It said that I can be taken to court because of my bird if the neighbor complains again. I don't have a bird or any pet. I've tried talking to the guy, but he refuses to answer his door, and when he comes out to watch me leave for work, he will shut his door and ignore me if I try to talk to him. Am I seriously going to have to go to court because this guy thinks I have a pet bird? How am I supposed to prove that I don't have a bird? Before we read the update to the story, I'm curious, do any of you have birds as pets? I gotta be honest, none of the people that I'm close with in real life have birds at home, but I am actually kind of thinking about getting a bird because I really like them as pets. Then again, I suppose that's not really a good idea if you record YouTube videos daily. The next story is gonna be the update to the story we have just read about the pet bird. I got another complaint from the head guy running the HOA that my, now multiple, birds are causing severe emotional distress to my neighbors and their children, who cannot sleep at night because of my flock of birds. The wife sent a recording to him as proof of my birds and to tell him to tell me my smoke alarm is also beeping and needs the batteries replaced because they can hear it from their unit as well. Now, you can clearly hear a smoke alarm beeping as well as birds chirping on the recording. However, the beeping is coming from their unit as I can faintly hear it if I press my ear to the shared wall. And the birds that are supposedly my pets, the ones that are so loud that their whole household cannot sleep, and it's causing severe emotional distress, those are the birds outside. It is literally the chirping of the birds outside they are hearing. Now, I am no Disney princess, so I have no effect on wild birds or imaginary pet birds for that matter. I mean, my singing is so terrible it actually scares them away. And I'm not sure how any person that is not a complete moron would mistake ordinary bird chirping for a flock of loud, abused rainforest birds. I have sent a letter to the HOA telling them to kindly pound sand and stop harassing me over the wild birds that I have no control over. I am also going to record the birds from my porch and from inside the condo, so if they say I have birds again, I can prove that it is just ordinary outside birds making reasonable outside bird noises. I'm looking into getting a bird feeder as well, because it is allowed by the HOA covenants, and F these people for being utter imbeciles and blaming me for the natural behavior of wild animals. Now I am just going to sit and wait for the next problem they have with me, because I don't think these nitwits will take kindly to being proven wrong over something so stupid. I gotta say, that is exactly the type of neighbor I love. Getting worked up over every single damn petty issue. What about you guys? Do you have neighbors that like to complain about small issues? Let us know in the comments. I think I once mentioned before, we have some of the worst neighbors, at least in my opinion, because even though nowadays they are kind of quiet, in the past they really gave us a hard time. I just hate it when people talk behind your back and try to basically sabotage your life. But anyway, let's continue with the stories. The HOA does not like my project car, so I've decided to park it legally in front of the neighborhood's grand entrance. For context, my family and I recently moved into a rental house while our new house is being built. The rental is in the back of a gated community on a mostly undeveloped street. Yesterday, I received a letter from the Homeowners Association informing me that I'm not in compliance of the "strictly enforced by towing" restriction, stating that vehicles may not be parked on the street overnight. In the letter was a picture of my project car, old BMW, parked beside our house on the street. I decided to look up the HOA's restrictions, which I have not seen before since I am a renter, and discovered I'm living in HOA hell. The street parking rule is just the beginning of a long list of restrictions, including one warranting a hefty fine for leaving the garage door open when not in use. This came as a huge surprise since several of my neighbors have parked their cars on the street without problem since I have lived here, so I assumed it was okay. I can only imagine that they have singled me out because my car is 30 years old. However, in my defense, it's very presentable and by no means junky. Being singled out made me incredibly frustrated to the point where I started doing legal research. It turns out my HOA has every right to tow my project car since it is parked on a private street in the neighborhood. The good news for me is that the street just outside of the neighborhood is public and it is 100% legal to park on it for any amount of time. Unfortunately for the HOA, the closest section of public street to my rental house is right in front of their nice gated entrance. Ironically, my old BMW has now become part of their image and there's nothing they can do about it until I move out in a few months. I'm curious, are there any ripe stars in our community who like to work on old cars? Even if you don't, what is your favorite old car? I gotta say, personally, I really like old BMWs and of course some of those old classic American muscle cars. But anyway, let me know your preference in the comments and now let's continue. Father killed a nosy HOA member when I was a child. Totally legal and he got off scot-free. So when I was a child we lived in Florida and our neighborhood had a really horrible HOA. I don't remember all of the details and I don't know precisely how an HOA works, but I do know that the biggest problem was one board member in particular named Mr. Creep, and Mr. Creep hated children and had no regard for personal property. He would often yell at me whenever I went outside, one time while I was going to a school bus. He kept fining my dirt poor father for every single infraction and inspected our house nearly daily, finding a new by-law violation every time. The last straw though was when he tried to inspect the inside of our house. Without any bylaws on his side, he told my father that he must let Mr. Creep inside his home to inspect every single room by threat of monetary loss. Of course, Dad said no and he got yet another fine. After a few weeks and many fines, we were supposed to go on vacation, but we found out at the last minute that after the last fine, we could not afford to leave. That night I heard a window break. Dad ran downstairs and then I heard my father's gun go off. Mr. Creep had waited until we were supposedly on vacation and intended to break into our house when we were away. Father killed him and it was all thanks to his hubris and those last few fines. Thankfully, this was completely legal self-defense in Florida, so Dad never saw a day in jail. And the rest of Mr. Creep's HOA buddies seemed more reluctant to mess with my family after that. I gotta say, that story gives me some weird r/that happened vibes, but anyway, I'm kind of surprised that apparently in Florida it's legal to have such a system installed in your home, because it does seem kind of dangerous and random. The next story is gonna be from our own subreddit and was posted by user Megalith1 and is titled Running a Pro Wrestling Show. This has nothing to do with r/HOA, but it's just a little variety to keep things interesting. It was the 1990s and I did not have a booking to perform, so my friend Kay had me run the show. This involved setting up music for entrances and calling wrestlers out when their match is ready. It was held in a high school and our ring was up on a stage. I went backstage and met with a guy we brought in called T. The son of a gun was 6'7" and had hair all over him. To earn respect from him, you had to take a chop to the chest. People were taking them and cussing afterwards. I stepped up to do my turn, determined to not make a sound. He hauled off and hit me so hard my vision blurred. I stood my ground and tried not to fall down. That was the first event of the evening. We had a couple female wrestlers for the show. They were a mix of pretty and backcountry strong. They were in the back hall warming up by locking up. The first few times went well, but then one of the girls got their fingers caught in the other's hair. This started a fight that would put any bar fight to shame. We had a hell of a time separating them and there was no way we could let them wrestle each other. The next mess up started with a match between K and T. It was a straightforward match which had a spot where they fight through the auditorium. My mom and wife were working the ticket booth and they had a small cooler full of drinks with ice. T picked up the cooler and broke it over K's head. When they worked their way back to the stage, K bladed meaning cut himself with a piece of razor blade taped to his wrist, and the first time nothing happened. So T gave a few more punches and K went to blade again. He gave it a good swipe, and when he stood up it looked like a waterfall of blood. They fought back to the ring and T pinned K. K staggered backstage and was very dizzy. I wanted to call an ambulance, but he refused. The final mess up was the big finale. T charged a lot to perform because he had television appearances, so we made him wrestle 2 matches. It was a hardcore match. There was a planned spot for T to V, our hardcore expert, through a table lit on fire in the ring. The best way to light a table for a spot is to use lighter fluid. We did not have lighter fluid, so we decided to use rubbing alcohol. Rubbing alcohol burns different than lighter fluid. The match went great in the beginning, lots of barbed wire and trash can hits to the head and back. V juiced the hard way, taking real hits to bleed, and the crowd was into it. They set up the spot and go outside the ring. T stomps V to the ground and goes for the table. T throws V into the ring and T's manager handed him the alcohol and matches. T set up the tables and used the whole damn bottle on it. He lit it and swear the damn flames reached the ceiling. At that moment I got a bad feeling. T then lifted V up over his head and put him through the table. T's chest hair caught fire with his beard. The fiery alcohol splashed up in the air and came down on the mat, catching it on fire. Then V rolled out of the ring, engulfed in flames. After a few seconds of shock, we covered him with jackets and a cloth banner to put him out. V's front and back was red. T managed to put out the table and the ring. We called the match with V unable to continue. He did not go to the hospital. I was mentally exhausted by the end, but K said I did a good job working around the mess ups. We stood around in the locker room, congratulating everyone for a good show and teasing V and T for their attempt at arson. The next day, the school called and banned us from putting on a show there again. I gotta be honest, after hearing this story, I'm kind of surprised by the fact that you guys used real razor blades back then, because I always thought that pretty much everything in wrestling is fake, including the blood. But then again, maybe things were very different in the 90s. The next story was also posted in our own subreddit by user Orca19904 and is titled "Customer Calls Corporate, Employee Gets Rewarded." And it is a Tales from Retail story. So I just got home from work and wanted to share a wholesome story that happened to me this weekend. I've been working in my new job for 3 weeks now, and this weekend was particularly busy with people doing shopping on the last weekend before Christmas. Near the end of my shift this past Saturday, I had a young woman come to my register who seemed nervous and a bit distraught. As I was ringing her up, she was asking about the prices of items and explaining she was tight on money. I myself don't have a lot of money either, so I understood where she was coming from and told her that. At one point, one of her items put her over the maximum amount of money she could spend, and I had to call a manager to get the item removed. And she became more upset and appeared to be on the verge of tears. I then told her, "Don't worry, it's okay, just relax, just breathe." This helps her and the manager gets the item removed and we complete the transaction. As she leaves, she thanks me and tells me she will put in a good word for me with the company. The next day, one of my managers tells me that he has a customer report to tell me about. It turns out that the woman kept her word and indeed called corporate and told them that my kindness had helped her keep from having a panic attack and that my words to her left her feeling elated when she left. As such, I was given an official recognition by the company and kudos from my managers, in addition to feeling immense pride at being able to help someone who was going through a rough time in their life. Thank you very much for posting that wholesome story, Orca. I gotta say, I'm a huge fan of wholesome stories, so feel free to post your own on r/ripestories. But anyway, unfortunately, this has to be the last story for today. As you might hear, guys, I'm still a bit sick and I'm terribly sorry for that, but it seems like there's not much I can do, I just have to wait. But either way, I hope you have a fantastic day and I see you again tomorrow. Oh, and in case I have not said it already, Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays, and thank you so much for all your support.